Good morning. This is Dr. Cynthia Elise Smith. I'm here this morning, not really expecting anybody to see it now because it is rather early where I am. But I think it's important that you look at it, you listen to it, and you share it. Because I've been talking about this for a while now. I've been talking about the 14th Amendment. I've been talking about Dred Scott. And I've been talking about this movement, which is gaining momentum with regard to the Convention of States, that I think is extremely, extremely important for you to know about. This morning when I got up, and I mean it was early this morning, it was like ridiculously early this morning, because I am retired, so I don't usually get up really early in the morning. But this morning I got up early. It was still dark because this thing has been, on my spirit. It has been on my mind, and it has been eating at me. I've made videos. I have actually created a presentation about the Convention of States and what the far right is doing. Koch brothers, the Mercers, and Alec are doing behind the scenes. Now, you know that big blowhard Trump, he always wants to jump the gun because he wants to be the one to say things first. And of course, he's going to get it wrong. But there's a method to his madness, and you need to understand. Okay? I wrote, I get inspired. So I was inspired this morning to write this essay. And it's called, and I'm going to read it. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about it, I guess. And maybe if there's anybody on here, I see a couple of people on here. Hi. We'll talk about it. You'll give me some comments and we can talk about it. I may even put this up on my YouTube page. I have a YouTube page now where I put a lot of my videos and things, and not a lot because I don't have a whole heck of a lot, but I will in time. And you can go over there and subscribe to it. Anyway, this is called Dred Scott and the 14th Amendment, an open letter to African American descendants of the enslavement. Dear African American descendants of the enslavement, I am writing this letter to ask you to consider the impossible. Back in 2015, most Americans thought that Donald J. Trump could never win the election. In 2016, the impossible happened, and he did. Since then, there have been many seemingly impossible events occurring with reckless frequency that many of you have become normalized, and many of them have become normalized in the minds of most of us. Most of us thought that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 could never be diminished or key provisions gutted, an impossibility which became possible in 2013 in a 5-4 vote, which effectively pierced the heart and freed 9 mostly southern states to change laws without having to gain federal approval. What has happened since has been a flurry of state laws which act as a suppressant, denying and disenfranchising the votes of millions of African Americans. This is things that we're seeing today. But in 1970, nobody would have told me that that Voting Rights Act would be gutted like it is today. As a matter of fact, there were a number of people who thought that was an amendment and that could never change. But it did. Don't be deceived. Trump gets information from his advisors daily. What he does is he takes what he wants to spin to the media, and then they weave an entire narrative for consumption of liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, blacks, and white people. The political machine behind the president knows who they have in that position. Trust me. They bank on the ignorance, short memories, division and discord of the masses to pursue their goals. They know that many of us don't pay attention to politics in general and are only focused on aspects of emotionally driven debates and disagreements relating to parties and race and things like that. All of those things that actually divide us. They loving it, okay? Many of us simply cannot fathom the real ramifications of a repeal of the 14th Amendment and what that could possibly mean for African American descendants of the enslavement. This week, there's been a great deal of talk about Trump and many of the Republicans' mutual desire to repeal the 14th Amendment. They are using the immigration problem as a reason to end birthright citizenship. They are pointing to non-documented people having children and being guaranteed all of the rights of citizenship, basically milking the system and costing the country billions of dollars. Some of the so-called establishment Republicans are even attempting to walk back Trump's rhetoric, explaining that an amendment can't be changed by the stroke of a pen on an executive order. That fact makes many people feel secure because they think that the Constitution is unbreakable, solid, and unchangeable. Recall, in 2 of my previous posts on my website, on my blog, and I've even discussed it on Facebook Live, the posts were called the Article 5 Constitutional Convention and Why You Should Be Concerned, and Democracy in Peril, No Amendment Might Be Spared. You can go on my website, www.alease-writer.com, and find those articles. And there's also a video presentation as well. Now, recall in those 2 previous posts, if you heard them or saw or read them, on the impending Article 5 Constitutional Convention and the far-right movement known as the Convention of States, sponsored by the Kochs, the Mercers, and ALEC, among other wealthy donors. I discussed the fact that the Constitution is in fact not secure, and that if it is opened, one of the amendments that could be in jeopardy would be the 14th. I actually made a point of talking about the fact that the 14th Amendment could be in jeopardy. And what's happening right now? You got Trump talking about what? The 14th Amendment. I'm not a prophet, but I do pay attention. I keep these on my lenses, okay? And I think that everybody needs to start wearing some nice clear ones so you can see, because some crap is going on right now, all right? For people who are unaware of how the history of these United States impacts us all, and especially and specifically African American descendants of the enslavement, the prospect of the repeal seems unlikely, since the reality of even one of the implications of the repeal is so impossible to imagine for most Black Americans, and because most Americans of all colors and nationalities are not generally well versed in the amendment or the Supreme Court case that is directly associated with it. And I'm going to talk about that too. It appears preposterous that a repeal would have anything to do with Black people. Okay, because you're listening to what you're being fed through the media. All right? All right. In fact, the politicians and the media are only talking about and reporting on one small aspect of the amendment. One section. There's so many sections. There's sections to the 14th Amendment, okay? And they're only talking about one piece. They're talking about the birthright citizenship provision. This provision is extremely important, however, when taken in within the whole context of the 14th Amendment. All right? The facts of the entire context of the 14th Amendment are not being, they're conveniently leaving those things out. They're only talking about the birthright thing, and everybody's like, yeah, get those illegal aliens out, they shouldn't be able to have kids. But you're not paying attention, because that's one aspect. But taken as a whole, I'm about to tell you something. In posts and comments on social media on this subject, many people are scoffing and hysterically laughing. Those little emoji, hysterical laughing faces, they abound. Okay, especially when I've been posting to particular comments some of the things that I've talked about, and I've been posting references to the 14th Amendment, and I've been getting laughed all over the place. Like, you got to be kidding me, really? So some of the things that they're laughing because Trump is like raving about the birthright citizenship and illegal immigration. He's associating it with that and that only. So naturally, Black people feel like they're immune. And I'm hearing things like, and I'm reading things like, so he will deport us? Where the hell would we go? Ha 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 ha. That's crazy. Ha 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 ha. This only deals with immigrants who have children. Ha. Any ruling would only have an effect on illegal immigrants coming over to have children. Well, let me tell you something. These are but a few of the comments that have come out of the discussions on this latest impossibility of Donald J. Trump. So what I'm asking you to do, dear Black American descendants of the enslavement, what I'm asking you to do is to put on your lenses and take a good, unblemished look at some unbleached history. The Supreme Court and the Dred Scott Decision. The Dred Scott Decision. Now, we already know that the judicial branch has been corrupted, as well as the executive branch. We don't know what's going to happen during the midterms. I trust nothing about what I'm hearing, but I do have hope that the Democrats will take over. But, as we've seen, they really aren't doing a whole heck of a lot. Anyway, on the surface, it can be said that the Dred Scott Decision only affected the individual, the slave Dred Scott, in the case. However, Supreme Court decisions always end as a farther-reaching interpretation of the Constitution, and is the way the law and the Supreme Court operates. Each and every case that comes before the Supreme Court has the potential to become precedent. Furthermore, each case is set into the annals of case law to be debated, overturned, or upheld, and used to justify or deny other cases brought before the court. Keep that in mind. Just to digress a moment, whenever you hear about the Supreme Court and Kavanaugh, you're only really hearing about the Roe versus Wade in terms of what the court could do overturn Roe versus Wade. This is supposed to be established case law, and that it is not supposed to be overruled, overturned. But everybody is very fearful that Roe versus Wade could be overturned. So what makes you think that Dred Scott could not be upheld? Anyway, the Dred Scott ruling stated as one of its conclusions in their decision, now you need to hear this, African Americans could never become U.S. citizens. Let me repeat that, just in case you don't know. In the Dred Scott decision, one of the conclusions that was drawn and put into the official Supreme Court decision was that African Americans could never become U.S. citizens. Now let's talk about the 14th Amendment. In 1868, during the Reconstruction, the 14th Amendment was ratified, granting citizenship to, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including former slaves, and guaranteed all citizens equal protection of the laws. Understand that there are a number of sections within Article 14. This was one of 3 amendments passed during the Reconstruction period, designed to eliminate slavery and to afford civil and legal rights for former slaves and their descendants. That's you and me. This amendment would become the basis for many landmark Supreme Court decisions over the years. Now, why do you suppose Dred Scott would be the basis of landmark Supreme Court decisions over the years? Why would it even have to come up anymore? The decision effectively rejected Chief Justice Roger Taney's decision, which stated, if born free, a black man could never claim any rights of citizenship under the Constitution. Let me repeat that as well. Even if born free, a black man could never claim any rights of citizenship under the Constitution. This was the decision, this was another one of the statements and conclusions made in the Dred Scott decision that was completely rejected by what? The 14th Amendment. Do it say anything about an immigrant in that thing? Does it say anything? Have I read anything that had anything to do with an illegal immigrant? No, because the 14th Amendment was specifically for African American descendants of the enslavement and freed slaves during Reconstruction, because of the Dred Scott decision that said that African Americans, people from African American descent, could never be American citizens. You better pay attention, because this is some serious stuff. This is why the 14th Amendment is so important to you, Black American descendants of the enslavement. This is why you need to be concerned with the prospect of its repeal. We know that Trump can't sign an executive order, but you better know that they only need 4 more states, and they are red states, to open the Convention of States. Now, if you read my posts, my essays from before that I talked about, or you look at the video, it's on YouTube and it's on my website that talks about it. It's a presentation. you will understand that the last time they had a constitutional convention was in 1787. And guess what they did? They tore up the Constitution. They tore it up. The one that we have right now is not the original Constitution, people. The reason why we have a Senate and a House of Representatives is because they had a constitutional convention in 1787 and they threw out the original Constitution and they started over. All bets are off. Read. Look it up. Get on Google and start reading. I have links to a number of things in that essay that I did on the Article 5 Constitutional Convention. You got to start knowing what's going on, people. You can't just worry about Cardi B and Nicki and what? You got to start paying attention because things are going to start happening in your life and you're not going to know what's going on. But what the hell? What are they saying? They saying what? We getting carted off around it. What? Imagine the impossible for just one moment. Just imagine the impossible for one moment, okay? The Convention of States is opening up a constitutional convention. And when it happens, we already know, or you should know if you paid attention to what I wrote and what I am in the presentation, that all bets are off. There are no provisions when a constitutional convention is convened. There is nothing. There are no rules, no regulations, nothing that says that they can't gut that Constitution if they wanted to. Now there are people who are called the constitutional purists. These are the most rabid white supremacist, nationalist, racists who want the Constitution to be the way that it was before the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, the 16th, and the 17th, and any other amendment that had anything to do with African Americans and African American descendants of the enslavement. If you think that I'm lying, if you think that I'm blowing smoke up your butt, you better think again. Because when you hear these people like Ryan and like, who's that guy whose father, Ron Paul, when you hear his son talking about the Constitution, I want the Constitution back the way that it was. That Constitution, the way that it was before 1787, was not a democracy. It was a republic. And it was a confederacy. You better read. Okay? So, one of the many possible amendments which could be added or removed is the 14th Amendment. And let's just say, since we are imagining the impossible, just for a moment, let's imagine that the 14th Amendment is one of the ones that's slated to be removed. The House and the Senate ratifies the repeal. Now, we know that that might be incumbent on what happens during the midterms. And God knows that I hope that the Democrats take the Republican seats and control the House, but they won't control the Senate. And that's a problem. All right? And we already know that the judicial branch is corrupt. So, with that in mind, the House and the Senate ratifies the repeal. A case is then brought to the Supreme Court in a little while. You know, they'll let some time go by and then a case will come up. It's none other than Dred Scott or something closely associated to Dred Scott. Now, if you're paying attention to history, you'll realize that there have been a few times where we have tried to come up and have made strides. If you knew how many actual civil rights bills and amendments we've had to go through since Reconstruction, it would curl my hair. Well, since the 14th Amendment no longer exists because, the Constitutional Convention took care of that, got rid of it. And that was the only protection for us and Dred Scott. The court overturns the Dred Scott decision, or more or less, or in other words, upholds Dred Scott. Now it becomes a real problem. We used to be citizens, but now we're not. Of course, the Mexican immigrants and the Guatemalans and anybody else who's coming over from the South, they won't be able to come over here and have babies. Small concept, it's going to affect us too. Trust and believe. Because that amendment was for us. It wasn't for immigrants. It was for us. And it was to kill Dred Scott. Effectively kill the possibility that Dred Scott could come up again. Like Roe versus Wade is always threatening to come up. So, I am imploring you, do not be naive enough to believe that the 14th Amendment, which was put into the Constitution, guaranteeing that Dred Scott could never be upheld, is only about immigrants. Do not be naive enough to believe that the impossible can't happen again. Some really impossible things have already happened. Some really impossible things have already happened. Well, this is just something for you to think about and think very carefully about. Do your research. Study up on the 14th Amendment. Understand that the 14th Amendment was designed to effectively kill Dred Scott, which said, in pertinent part, that African Americans, these are the words in the Dred Scott decision, that African Americans can never, N-E-V-E-R, be American citizens. We thought that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 could not be gutted. We thought that we were going to be okay and be able to vote, and it would be against the law for the southern states to do things to suppress the vote. But here it is, 2018, and that's all they're doing. That's what they're doing. They're suppressing the vote in every imaginable way possible, short of poll taxes and the ability for someone to read understand and recite the Constitution. Anyway, I'm going to put a link to my website in the comments section where you'll be able to read this. I have to go and while I was reading it to you, I noticed some typos. Oops. And I'm going to be putting that up, and it's that way you can read it yourself. And I'm also going to put a link to that on my Facebook page, on my doctor page, my like page. Don't forget to get on there and like that page. And you can subscribe to my website, and you can also subscribe to my YouTube page as well. I think I'll upload this video there as well. Please, please, please do not be complacent. Vote. Your life depends on it. Dr. C out.